Hello, everybody. It is me, Pacific. Wow. I like what somebody said. We'll just wait and see when Tsunami Pacific or the Pacific Tsunami rolls in. I like that, viewer. That's good. Hold on a second. I want to talk about disasters, but before I do you remember I read to you the black woman on Craigslist who wants a man who will buy her an Audi? Yes, I do take the time to respond to those, and I said, this is truly amazing. Another woman getting on here wanting the man to provide her with this and that. Nothing that's needed. I said I didn't bother to send my photo. I didn't bother to even tell about myself because I have a 19-year-old truck, and you wouldn't be interested in me anyway. She wrote back and said, thank you for offering me your 19-year-old truck, but I've been through a lot of stuff where I've given and given and given, and I know what I want. And I wrote her back. I said, you misunderstood me, ma'am. I'm not offering you my 19-year-old truck. You're not my type. And the reason why? Because I want a woman who loves me for me. I said, I've also been through a lot of stuff, but I'm not out there asking for a woman to buy me an Audi. Why do I mention this on a video about disasters? Because it has everything to do with the vanity of the age we're living in. I just got done watching some different, what we used to call in the old day, newsreel footage, video footage of the Indonesian tsunami. Now remember, I had met a girl online years ago from Indonesia, Listi. And when I looked at those people on their motorbikes, and the streets are packed and jammed, and that 9.1 earthquake had hit, and some people knew a tsunami was evident, but a lot did not. And as they're walking in the streets and the marketplaces, suddenly they're horrified as water just starts moving in and picking up everything in a jumbled mass of cars and vans and motorbikes and people and animals and palm trees and tin roofs and pieces of buildings, and everything that we depend on is being pushed nonstop. I watched as people are riding jagged piles of debris and stepping from one piece to another without trying to fall in the shifting debris pile that's inundated with water, grabbing onto bridges to pull themselves up to safety. Pacific went through the 1971 Sylmar earthquake in California. I don't remember the earthquake itself. I just remember being awake after it and very scared. Cracks had been formed in the walls of our stucco home in Los Angeles at 2814 Delmead Street. I remember hearing my folks talk about it. Some cereal fell out of the boxes, fell out of the cupboard, but all in all, we were fine. I remember my dad took us for a drive as we saw busted freeways, overpasses collapsed, and the VA hospital, an entire wing of the hospital, literally just fell off and laid face down on the property. In 1983, I went through 3 6.0s sitting at the table with my grandmother. My folks were somewhere in Winnemucca, Nevada. My grandpa was in the yard in his little Chinook camper. We had had a tremor, and I remember saying, and my sister remembers this to this day, we're sitting at the table, we felt a little tremor, and I said, one of these days we're going to get a big one. I was just a kid, I'm no prophet. I don't know how much longer after that the big one occurred, but we were still sitting at the table when a 6.2 hit. We all started to get up, and I was junior high and wasn't thinking of my poor grandma, and we got up and bolted towards the doorway of the kitchen. And I watched my grandma's coffee cup wiggle across the table, the antique oak table. We all got in the doorway, and I remember my sister was horrified, and that was the first time I'd said the F word in the presence of adults. And I watched, we had bookshelves on the wall, and I watched the books waterfall off the open ends onto the floor, and I heard banging behind me. The shower door came off its hinges downstairs and crashed, didn't break. A little mantel grandfather clock fell down on its crown, surprisingly, didn't bust the door, the glass door, just damaged the top wood edifice, dishes falling out of the cupboard behind me, and as I was holding the door jamb, I kid you not, that 2-story wooden snow load built house, that doorway was moving like this, and I was going with it. I was terrified all day long. I wasn't a Christian. We went out into the street, as did all the other neighbors. We lived on Snowcrest. 50% of the houses were owned by ski tourists. This happened in Memorial Day weekend on a Sunday before Memorial Day. So the houses were empty. But the few of us full-time residents put out lawn chairs, sat out in the street. And I think I told you this before. Frozen in my mind was when we came out on the street and looked towards the Sierra Nevadas, there was this dust rising into the air, thick all over. As we sat in the street, we watched a woman in an old VW Bug gripping the wheel in terror, and we all jumped out of the way as she came flying down the street, horrified, scared. And all of a sudden there was a long line of cars exiting Mammoth Lakes. This happened a week after, this was 1980. I think I said 83. It was 1980, a week after St. Helens blew, creating a very newsworthy, full-blown eruption. I was fascinated with St. Helens. I was fascinated with volcanoes. Then all of a sudden, it wasn't long before the United States Geological Survey came rolling into Mammoth with their vehicles and equipment and put their seismic stuff all over Mammoth Mountain. I was fascinated. We went to town hall meetings with a Forest Service guy, or was it a forestry guy or USGS guy named Al Idecker, who said eruption could be imminent for Mammoth Lakes. Everybody was put into high alert. We lived there till 1983. And my folks said, we do not know what's going to happen, but we're tired of all the snow, but these earthquakes and the news that there's magma moving under Mammoth, we're selling. And that's why we went to Prescott. Our house sold to a group of firefighters in LA that bought the house to turn it into a ski cabin, which is originally what it was. Pacific has grown with a fascination with disasters. That's how I got into the Titanic, the Towering Inferno, the Triangle Shirt Factory, the Hindenburg, tsunamis. There's been earthquakes on Mount Ararat that have caused huge damage. Big pieces of snow falling down, glacial stuff falling down. I've always been fascinated by the power of the raw. If a man or woman can sit there and watch those Indonesian video footage of the 2004 tsunami and not get choked up, they truly are jaded. It doesn't matter whether I know those people. To see such a mass of humanity not knowing what's coming and inundated, and seeing men, women, and children just carried out to sea, 220,000 deaths. And that was what I believe was only countable. I'm sure it was more than that. What does a woman wanting a man to provide her an Audi have to do with all this? Everything. We look at the stuff we deal with in American society, and almost all of it could be eliminated overnight by disasters such as these inundating our entire lives. Most Americans do not know what it is like to endure a typhoon, a tsunami, or a true earthquake that levels an entire city. We watch it on the news while eating our chips and some drinking their beer. And Americans have become glazed, unaffected, and the news becomes a form of entertainment. We get home and we rush to see what happened over there, and we're voyeurs into another world. I read to my viewers parts of Revelation recently. Last night, the hail at the max was this big, and it's amazing how noisy it is. It sounds like it's golf ball sized, and it isn't. Can you imagine what a 100-pound hailstone would sound like? Thwack! As it comes crashing through the 3/4-inch thick board under the shingle and between the joist and through the roof into the attic, and still traveling who knows through what. Disaster should serve to remind us, one, of our mortality, and two, the uncertainty of life. We don't know when our life will end. We don't know how it will end. And too many of us in this culture are worried about feathering our own nest and our 401ks, insurance, and everything. You look at Indonesia with people in the marketplace, and you know they didn't have health insurance. You know they didn't have retirement. When those people lost, they truly lost. There's nothing I hate more than a news reporter flying in with their hair done just right and holding a camera and a microphone in front of some grieving woman whose husband and children were swept out to sea, and some bimbo dingbat from the U.S. says, "This must be really hard for you." Are you serious? Don Henley's song comes to mind. She can tell you about the plane crash with a gleam in her eye. Dirty laundry, man. The news journalists can be insensitive all to get a story. Even Pacific has a fascination with wanting to capture events, but as soon as it involved the suffering of people, I would off the camera, put it down, and rush to their aid. That is where the gloves got to come off. Yeah, I get annoyed at the evening news. Sometimes I can't watch it because it is so tactless, so ridiculous. To put a camera in a grieving person's face over such tragedy, it doesn't make couth sense. 220,000 people is a lot. And I'm going to say that people brush it off as, well, there's just more news now. No, there's not just more news now. Big events were reported back then. It just took time for us to get the information. We are seeing the magnitude of events increase as never before. The 2011 tsunami that overtook Japan. What you don't hear on the evening news is that the government didn't do anything for a host of those people. We watched as entire towns and cities were swept out to sea. I was renting from a lady in Spokane, and I was crying. They showed a semi-truck from a helicopter driving down this winding road, and you could see the sea advancing. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, this guy's going to drive right into this thing. We think we have our lives under control. The cocky people in their fancy cars, their suits and ties, and the self-assured smugness that comes with Monday through Friday. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Yeah, right. Americans do not know disaster. They do not. America is too myopic. We do make a big deal out of one that is murdered. But when hundreds of thousands lost their lives overseas, Most Americans I've heard said, well, that's just a part of the world that gets all that. Not really. In my 48 years, I'd have to do some digging on Google, but I don't know of a tsunami that took out 220,000 people. Well, there's more people now. There was a lot of people when I was a kid over there. Asia has always been crowded. There was a chart released back when I was a kid about the increase of sizable earthquakes decade by decade. And it went up significantly. Only in the last few years of my life have I ever heard of 9-pointers and higher. When we were kids, it was the big 8.0. 1964 Anchorage, an 8-point something, dropped one section of Anchorage 20 feet down. There was a tsunami that hit, I think it was Valdez, and it wiped out a couple places that are no longer there. There was a ship, I believe it was out at anchor, and it rode through this, and there was black and white footage of the ship rising up and down and the water roaring in. The 1994 Northridge earthquake. Sheesh, that was a year of disasters. That was a year I married the ex, who's continuing like a raging typhoon, blowing hard against my life. 1994, I'm sitting in my bus. We had record cold. Lake Superior froze from shore to shore. Some were hovering around 35 below, not counting wind chill. It's just before I start my bus route, laying over out in Minnesota, sticks, cold, dark. I hear the news come on about Northridge. I think, my gosh, all we got to contend with up here is freezing temperatures. I went back after my routes. The mechanics, and they were real idiots, let me tell you. I came in and I said, man, it's sad. There was a bad earthquake in Northridge. People were killed. The Minnesota nice mechanic says, who cares? Idiots in California wish the whole thing would drop off in the ocean. People that live out there are idiots anyway. They know there's earthquakes. I said, I'm from there. And people live all over the world and disaster happens. I said, you're very insensitive. They laughed. Minnesotans think they're tough because they go through 35 below. They haven't been to Panama. They haven't been to places where the heat is just brutal. They don't know what it's like to get dengue fever, or otherwise known as malaria. My Filipina friend told me the other day when she went to the Philippines last summer, she came back, she had gotten dengue fever over there, and I said, what is that like? She goes, it's hell. It is very easy for Americans in their comfortable zone to look at something and go, oh, God must be judging them. I don't know what Christian quack said it when Japan got hit, but the comment was made, well, they're pagan. I felt the anger boil to the surface and said, and we're not? Biblical people claiming to be Christians in this country aren't pagan and materialistic and rude? It is only by the grace of God that America has not hit such massive events such as these. But I know for a fact, and I feel it in my bones, to use an old phrase, we're going to get it. When? I don't know. How? I can't even say, and I'm not going to play prophet. I have a verse to back me up. To whom much is given, much will be required. And because of the way we are over here, and because of what we're doing, we're going to be judged. The whole world will be judged. But God will make sure that America has judgments that Americans really feel deeply. One could argue and say, well, we can't get a tsunami in Denver. Well, I'll tell you what. There's a lot of things could level this city to the ground, such as a complete economic collapse. That'd be enough to do almost everybody in. But I talked about the seas turning to blood, hailstones 100 pounds, an earthquake so great the cities of the nations fell. That's at the end of the tribulation. That's in the last 3.5 years when the, tempo of God's wrath just fires up. It was those earthquakes that I went through that created such fear in me that I was always fearful of dying. It was God using that, His very created world, and the birth pains of a fallen world to push Pacific to the cross. So though I fear disaster, I also feel that disaster is my friend because it pushed me to my knees. A woman in California had built a house and a bed that was completely earthquake proof. And everybody thought it was cute, and I thought, yep. And one thing could still fall out of that ceiling and fall just right and still hit her in the face and take her out. Remember David and Goliath? David didn't need might. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And he swung his sling of stones and if I remember right, didn't it go right here? Where the armor didn't quite come together. Do you think David was that good of an aim? I don't know, but I have a feeling that God made sure that he was aiming that day right to the weak spot. Let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Remember, the arrogant people that are driving around irregardless of traffic laws and irregardless of other people and laughing and mocking through life, guess what? They got a target on their back. Take heed lest you fall. Did you know that the biggest disaster that could happen today in your life is a heart attack, a stroke? As somebody told me once, I'm getting tired of all these people prophesying the end of the world. The end of the world could be for you personally today in a car crash, a heart attack. God could say, Pacific, your heart is mine. Done. Me getting in my truck. A simple errand ran could cost me my life. You think you own the world? You think you're like in the cartoons with the bone in your mouth like a dog and going? God can rip it all away in seconds. If there's one thing I've learned over and over that I'm constantly reminded of and sobered by is that our ship sails a certain direction and your bow can be hit by a rogue wave and you could be sent off course and going in a way you never thought. We need to look at disasters and we need to pay attention. They have a message to tell us. The first message a disaster should tell us is that we're all going to die. The second message that one should learn from disasters is it's because we live in a fallen, sin-cursed earth. What does the Bible say? The earth groans in travail, birth pangs. And that's something that Bible students should be well aware of as those birth pains get more intense in a mother. That means a baby's about to be delivered. But let me make something very crystal clear. Too many people in the 60s, 70s, and 80s said, oh, there's more earthquakes, it means God's return. No. During the tribulation, you'll see the birth pangs, and you'll see that, come on, and it'll get more intense during the tribulation. We cannot look for those signs right now. People are looking for too many signs. There is no sign that has to happen for the rapture of the church. But after the rapture of the church, the birth pangs will become intensified, signaling to the Jewish people and an unbelieving world, pay attention to these birth pangs. God is wrapping up this whole shebang. When you see Indonesians being swept out to sea and you see their livelihood, their vehicles, their everything, it amazes me when you see a beautiful building and the minute it's reduced to rubble, you can't even recognize what anything was. that has given me perspective about how much we open our wallets for and go, why do we collect all this junk? I heard a Christian man tell me once, I was helping him and his family move. They lived just down the street here. This was years ago. He was so excited to go back to Kentucky. He wasn't a fan of Colorado either. He and his wife, children were nice family, nice people. I said, wow, you got a lot of stuff, man. He smiled and he says, all I'm doing is moving the kindling from one place to another because it's all going to burn in the end, brother. I smiled and I said, thanks for the perspective. And he said, it's true. All we're doing is buying kindling. How many of you Christian viewers stop and think about that? How many of you people are owned by your things? When you think about moving, you think about all the stuff you got to pack. If you want to get free in Christ, get rid of it all. We're living in uncertain times, viewers, and I want to make that crystal clear. And we should not live in fear. I just read in my Bible devotional in the Daily Read, be anxious for nothing. Oh, Pacific's not a master at that one. I'm a master at anxiety. But by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known unto God with thanksgiving. Don't forget the with thanksgiving. And the peace of God that passes all understanding shall guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Boy, I have to tell myself that every single day when people trouble me and foes assail me. I was watching after I did the video of the storm last night. I'm sorry if you guys thought that video was a little hokey. It was just spontaneous, and it did. I mean, for a minute it sounded like, man, we're going to get it. The rain was falling. You couldn't pick that up in the video. But it was coming down. In the short time that I did that video, the bed of my truck with the bed liner, there was an inch of standing water in it. It was like, holy cow. And then it rained when I went to bed last night. Less of the thunder and lightning and the kaboom, but just a nice, steady, gentle rain. I like storms. But even last night as I was standing there recording this, I thought to myself, oh God, please don't let the hail come and trash my truck. It could do enough damage to the truck in glass that you're looking at a couple $1,000s in windows. Actually, it depends. Not to mention the damage to metal. And yet at the same time, God can allow whatever happens that He pleases. God is more merciful to us than we know, and we need to stop and say, well, these things don't happen in the U.S. There are people waking up to the fact that earthquakes are showing up in places they never thought that they could show up. Folks, when you have something called plate tectonics, the whole earth is moving around on plates. Earthquakes can and will happen everywhere. The cities of the nations fell. Nations is plural. That means all countries. The cities of the nations fell. Any city in your mind? Gone. I would challenge my viewers to do a little research on the New Madrid Fault. The 1800s earthquake, I believe it was the 1870s, that hit along the New Madrid Fault in Missouri, causing church bells to ring in Philadelphia, hills to be formed in Kentucky, and the mighty Mississippi to flow backwards. Look it up. People do forget. And as I was talking about these young, in-your-face, rude, foul, dark, satanic-infested youth today, not all of them, they have this no-fear attitude. And as I told a Christian friend of mine on the phone last night, we need to remember something. In Revelation, it says that these people would cry out, these people that go through that time of great tribulation, they will cry out to the rocks and the hills, saying, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne. For the day of his wrath is come, and who can stand? These are unbelievers that are shaking. It says, during that time, men's hearts will fail them for fear. I get so annoyed at little immature baby boys in their pickup trucks with no fear on the back. Really? Do you know how microscopically tiny head of the pin mentality that is, dude? I want to get a bumper says no fear. Wait till you see God. Wait till you see the wrath of the Lamb. What a contradiction. The wrath of the Lamb. A sheep with wrath. Come on. Come on, men. That's bad. Like a lamb is threatening. But that lamb is also the Lion of the tribe of Judah. There's a song called, or a book called Wild at Heart by Eldridge. It says, sometimes we men need to roar. That's right. The song by Katy Perry, you're gonna hear me roar. Well, wait till the lamb roars. And I think, if I remember correctly, somewhere in the Old Testament it says the Lord will roar from Zion. I don't know what that's all going to be like. Disasters need to remind us we live in a fallen, cursed world. And while you're busy building your house of cards and your retirement of cards and everything that can be lost in less than 5 minutes. Let's talk about Japan. This water wasn't a 100-foot wall that just came in like a Hollywood disaster flick. It's like a creeping ooze, just slowly inundating, grabbing, and pulling everything to the ground. And when all that water went back out, it took all that stuff it had wrecked going in and dragged it back going out. We're still finding stuff landing on the Oregon coast from the Japanese tsunami. A ship made it all the way to Canada, adrift. Some big piece of something from Japan drifted up on an Oregon beach. A sea container with somebody's motorcycle. Flotsam and jetsam and pieces of house and safes bobbing in the water. God says in his word that he takes from the rich and gives to the righteous, takes from the wicked. Any man or woman that's smug about their titles, their possessions, and their bank accounts is very, very ignorant and foolish. The God of the Bible will take it all away eventually. You never see a U-Haul following a hearse to the gravesite. Why? Because your stuff doesn't go with you. But what bothers me more, and there were those Americans so moved by the 2004 tsunami and the 2011 in Japan, and they gave. But a lot of Americans, especially these young twerps, these punks, these rude girls that are stuck up and obsessed with their stupid technology and texting and flaky, insignificant lives lived over chaff and dust in the wind, they could care less. There are times I wanted to take an entire busload of these stuck-up, twerp teenage girls and say, come with me to Indonesia for 2 weeks. And I guarantee you that they would all be gripping me. Pacific, don't leave us. This is scary. Why? Because they're not all interested in you? Because some of the local men see how hot looking you are and they'd like to take full advantage of you in a wrong way? Because you see poverty? Because you don't see the girls all walking around with cell phones? Because this is scary? I told a bunch of teenagers on my bus route from Glover Middle School in Spokane, Washington, if I had tons of money and I had your parents' consent and all kinds of waivers, I would take all of you guys to the Philippines to give you a reality check. They said, you would take us? I said, if I legally could, yes. Because I said, you guys live in a world where you don't get it. These were kids who were giving me trouble every day. I said, I would love to take you to the Philippines and watch your faces as you see a life that's nothing like what you know here. I said, you guys sit around and look at porn on your computer all day. They had told me that. I didn't just throw that out there. I said, you guys are rude. I said, I'd like you to see how the other majority of the world lives. To say America is insular is an understatement. To say Australia is insular is an understatement. To say Canada is insular is an understatement. To say that white culture in general is insular and ignorant cannot be overstated enough. We brush off and we ignore and we justify our cold indifference and say, well, they get tsunamis and earthquakes. Wow, does that make you feel better as you wipe the corners of your mouth with your napkin at a 5-star restaurant? Really? Today, for you, friend, could be the end of the world. And it doesn't have to be any of this big stuff. Hollywood likes to capitalize on that. And if somebody really looks accurately at a Hollywood movie, they're stupid. They're so unrealistic, so contrived, and people spend their hard-earned money tithing Hollywood for more tripe such as this. I find that watching The Power of a Storm last night, just allowing God to get my attention, break the cycle of internet and the world that we get all obsessed over, I find that sometimes God just interrupts us. And that wind whipping through the trees is God saying, Pacific, come look. Pay attention to me. Get off the computer. Pay attention. What if the video last night, the hailstones got bigger and bigger, and suddenly they're big enough and I know my truck is getting destroyed and the glass is breaking all around me? Oh, of course everybody would want to see that. I asked myself a question. Is there a certain point at which you'd stop running this thing? And I said, well, yeah. It'd be kind of hard to keep running this with 2 elderly people here and everything's being destroyed. I'd have to shut her down. All of us like a sense of adventure. All of us are fascinated by drama and disasters like that. And the only time people start crying and whining is when it hits them personally. It shouldn't be just like that. It should affect us when we see any humanity have to go through suffering like that. And for a Christian to stand up and say, God judged them from their $500,000 home and their $65,000 SUV and their daily trip to $5 Starbucks coffee is disgusting. I talked about TV preachers yesterday. Why aren't they judged? They're not, are they? Are they? Are they? They continue to flourish like rabbits. You can't talk to them. You can't tell them anything. They're not teachable. They've got a huge following and an ego that doesn't quit and bank accounts that keep pouring in. If you can't even tell God's people the truth, how in the world are we going to get the attention of the lost? C.S. Lewis said, suffering is God's megaphone to humanity. It's true. People are more open to God when the rug's been ripped out from under them than when they're comfortable. I want you all to think about the most problems you've had with other people. Have you had problems with people that are going through a hard time more than people who are comfortable? You tell me, and I'll bet you that everybody on my video channel will get back to me and say the people that caused me the most harm, the most damage, the most hate, the most rudeness is all people who are very comfortable and living very good lives. I'll bet you. I'll bet you a lot. When I drive out there in traffic, very seldom I'm going to be very blunt in what I say. Very seldom is it the hardworking Mexican man driving in the beat-up old pickup truck that's causing me trouble. It's the upper white middle class. They got the nice automobiles that are flaunting traffic laws, having no respect for my right to be there, and that I'm following the rules. For crying out loud, I drive a school bus, and most white Americans, they have no respect for a school bus. The more comfortable people are, the more petty they become, the more rude they become, the more self-serving and selfish and greedy they become. And it is stuff like that that makes me say, you know, God, you're sending disasters to these people that are already struggling in Indonesia. Do you think you could shake up the middle class and the upper middle class in this country? Because they've become awfully smug and rude. All this dating stuff, all this stuff that I talk about, feminism, I guarantee you it would come to a screeching halt if the rug was pulled out of Americans' lives right now. Women wouldn't have time to get on dating sites saying, I want a man who's... You'd find women saying, gosh, any man that cares for me during this darkest hour is going to be my knight in shining armor. And conversely, will men stand up and see some poor woman when disastrous consequences hit us and says, come on, I'll take care of you. We can go back. The 1929 Depression in the U.S. caused people to come together. World War II caused us to come together. We haven't had anything like that in a long time. We don't wish for war. We don't wish for disaster, but the more I watch people in this country, I think I hate to admit this, viewers, tribulation, suffering, disasters, trials change us. When we don't go through hard stuff, we start becoming more myopic, more self-centered. That is a fact. I've been having fun making videos. I hope you're having fun watching them. Thank you, Eric, for getting back to me. Eric shared with me things about his trip to the Philippines. Both good and both bad. He said that the youth are changing all over the place. They got that attitude. And I'm going to tell you where that comes from. They're connected through the internet and the pop culture. And it's the young people today. We got two kinds of young people. We got those that are really going straight into satanic darkness. And then I know quite a few right here in the U.S. and Indoquita that are in their 20s. They have maturity and wisdom, and they are after God. And they see what's coming, and they're concerned. Thank God that He still has a remnant in the young people. But most of them, they're grabbing that grease pole and just going, whee, right down. And it's not funny. They're arrogant. They're foul. They're hateful. You try to tell them about truth, they're just going to mock and cuss and spit. Disaster's going to hit them one day. Believe me, disaster's going to hit all of us at some point. I think of that line in The Phantom of the Opera. Disaster beyond your imagination will occur. Oh yeah. I know. Because the book, the final chapter, I read the end of the book. I know the end. And I know the beginning. And I know the middle. So think about disasters and ask yourself, what is the lesson God wants you to learn from it? Does He want you to have a more sobering view of the world around you instead of a flippant, careless, self-centered attitude? I would think so. This is Pacific, giving you something to think about, chew on. Have a great day. Bye-bye.